On today's World Insight, the World Health Assembly convenes online, Taiwan's attempt to join as an observer, and the vaccine rollout on the agenda. And we hear from the Uruguayan president on his nation's place in the global trading system and how his nation is using vaccines to contain the pandemic.
This is done in the context of a strategic partnership. It has become increasingly comprehensive for us.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and this is World Insight. We begin with the World Health Organization's opening its annual World Health Assembly. The virtual forum will run from May the 24th to June the 1st. This year's session stresses the urgency of ending the current pandemic and preventing the next one by building a healthier, safer, and fairer world. Since the pandemic broke out, there have been more than 166 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, including more than 3.4 million deaths. The pandemic is far from over, and the global response is at a critical phase, with vaccine inequality being one of the most urgent issues. Addressing the opening World Health Assembly on Monday, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the world is, quote, at war against COVID-19, and he called on world leaders to take bold decisions, quote unquote, to end the global pandemic spreading and mutating in poorer countries. Heads of state and governments and special guests around the world participated in Monday's high-level segment. So how can the world unite? Well, will it unite in fighting the pandemic? How to reform and strengthen the WHO and the global health system? Let's loop in our panelists. In Washington, D.C., Kate Tulenko, CEO of Corvus Health. In Seattle, Dr. Alice Kim Kyung-tan, internist at the Ms. Medi Women's Hospital from South Korea. And in Beijing, last but not least, Ding Sheng, Institute Director of the Global Health Drug Discovery Institute and the Dean of the School of Pharmaceutical Sciences from Tsinghua University. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. Now, several things being mentioned at the World Health Assembly. Lack of preparedness against global pandemic and the vaccine inequality are just some of those topics. First of all, why are we so much lack of preparedness? After all, we've already had some similar pandemics 100 years ago, and if you think about it, even SARS more than 10 years ago. What really happened? What is wrong with us, with our system? Dr. Tulenko.
I think there are a number of things going wrong. So in 2005, most countries in the world signed the International Health Regulations, which was a binding agreement to help prevent pandemics. And since then, 5 pandemics have been declared. And the problem is, even though that WHO declared a pandemic at the end of January, it wasn't until mid-March that most countries responded by doing lockdowns. And so it's thought now that we need a different international contract that has a little bit more teeth in it, so that when pandemics or outbreaks are declared, that the countries respond much faster.
So you talk about the enforcement of policies, particularly related to possible pandemic, whether it's at local level or national level, the efficiency of implementing. Dr. Tan, what do you make of what is going on wrong with the current approach and the current system?
Right. The current approach, when this all broke out, I would say it was too little, too slow, and too late. Pandemic response needed to be a priority on everyone's national agenda, and it wasn't. There needed to be coordinated all of government responses, and there wasn't in many cases. And of course, the funding for the WHO was inadequate, and it still is. And so they're just on so many levels, the WHO level, on a global level, and each country-wide level, there were so many deficiencies. And as the independent panel has stated, every chain, every link in the chain had deficiencies and weaknesses, and they all need to be strengthened in order to prevent the next pandemic.
Dr. Ding, your take.
I would say actually, first, really, I mean, we have not faced such pandemic for many, many years. Even in the past 20 years, there were a few of such viral outbreak, but it hasn't really reached such unprecedented level. Certainly, I think no one has really prepared for this scale of viral pandemic situation. Secondly, I really agree with other panelists. This really would require a global coordination. And again, what we've seen since last year is really there's much less coordination between different countries. And even within each country, perhaps there's less desirable coordination between different regions. And again, I think what we've seen so far is really people have to relearn lessons and lessons again.
Okay.
So certainly all of those has to be really improved.
Several fronts we can learn the lesson, right? And see whether we really learned the lesson. First of all is when the third wave, commonly known as the third wave now, hit the world, whether countries and also localities are prepared and be able to implement and enforce. Second, of course, it's about the vaccines. We see now that's an ongoing process. Inequality of vaccines is not a secret. Most of the countries in the world do not have most of the jabs, and yet 10 countries in the world have almost the majority of the inoculations so far. Dr. Ding, from China's perspective, how do you see that?
I think actually from the very beginning, there have been actually a lot of discussions in terms of how vaccines could be developed and later on distributed. And so far, I would say actually we actually have been really successful in terms of developing the vaccine and also in the early phase of vaccination in certain regions. But again, it's not uncommon actually, manufacturing of vaccine need to be scaled. Certainly distributing acquisition and the distribution of those vaccines to other countries actually has to be practically staged. So I think actually we all have to really again learn from this process and really improve on the equality situation.
Dr. Tulenko, the U.S. Inoculation process seems to be going quite well so far. We see quite a number, the huge population of the U.S. Be able to be protected so far as the numbers indicate. But what about the global governance and the U.S. role so far?
Well, I think it's important to look at it from another angle. So, for example, the UK bought 5 times more vaccines than it would need to cover its population. The U.S. also purchased more vaccines than it would need. And there actually are 3 advantages to doing something like this. It's not necessarily vaccine nationalism. One, when countries make these large purchases, a country like the U.S. and the UK, they can sign the contracts faster. They're trusted partners. The pharmaceutical companies have dealt with them before, and they'll work with them quite quickly. So that's one thing. 2 is this is basically creating an advanced market commitment. That one of the big problems and main barriers that pharmaceutical companies don't make more vaccines or they don't make drugs for a lot of tropical diseases is because they don't think there'll be a market. No one will buy them. But when the UK comes and says, I will buy 5 times the number of doses I need for my population, that creates a market. And the pharmaceutical companies know that someone will buy their vaccine. Yeah. And then the third reason that this sort of overbuying can be good is it prevents you from putting all your eggs in one basket. So if the UK had just invested in AstraZeneca's vaccine and that vaccine didn't work, they would have been in trouble. They would have been out of luck. But by investing and purchasing multiple vaccines, they were able to both protect themselves more and protect others more. But I think, the issue of vaccine nationalism perhaps can be defined as countries vaccinating their low-risk citizens before other countries are able to vaccinate their high-risk citizens. High risk being defined as either for health reasons or for job reasons, for example, being a frontline health worker or if you're a refugee or in a crowded refugee camp.
Yeah.
So I think that's perhaps the best way to define vaccine nationalism.
In that regard, how to look at the U.S.?
Then under that definition, then the U.S. would be considered to be doing vaccine nationalism, because pretty much anyone in the U.S. can get a vaccine now as a walk-in. You don't even need an appointment. But the U.S. has now committed the rest of the vaccines to other countries. So I think we're seeing that move. And remember, it was only in late December that vaccinations started for COVID. And even if we're able to produce in the next year enough vaccines to vaccinate all 9 billion people in the world, it's going to come out incrementally. So the world needs to develop a way to prioritize who gets the vaccine.
Yeah.
So perhaps it would be countries with large outbreaks like India or Brazil, or it'll be countries that have large number of vulnerable people, either large numbers of elderly or large number of internally displaced people.
Right. Dr. Tulenko gave us quite a clear analysis from the U.S. perspective. But I can tell through the answers there's a lot of economics in terms of why the purchasing can be fast, why to buy in such a huge amount, and why it is possible to encourage as a result of the pharmaceutical companies. But besides the economics, in a pandemic, there are many other things that people should think about. For example, human lives. Maybe that's an option and an important point. And how to make sure the most dangerous population, as Dr. Tulenko just mentioned, will be inoculated first, so that the overall global risk of a further development of the pandemic will be hindered. That is the key here. Dr. Tan, on that point, how do you see the current situation? What is the problem here?
Well, in January, I would say that the situation looked fairly bleak in terms of equitable vaccine distribution. However, in the month of May alone, let's just take a look at what happened. At the Global Health Summit, Pfizer pledged 1 billion doses of their vaccine to low and middle income countries. Johnson & Johnson pledged 200 million doses. Moderna pledged 100 million doses. Earlier this month, Novavax pledged 350 million doses to the COVAX facility. The United States also, prior to the Global Health Summit, pledged 80 million doses of vaccine to be donated. And so within just a few weeks, within this month of May, we've really turned, I think, the tide in terms of trying to achieve the COVAX goal of delivering 2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines by the end of the year. If all of these vaccines, so far COVAX has delivered 69 million doses, that's as of May 21st. So if all of these pledges are kept and they are all delivered by the end of 2021, we will have achieved and even exceeded COVAX's initial goal. Of course, that will not be enough to end the pandemic by any means, and so that's why the independent panel has recommended that another 2 billion doses be pledged in 2022. And fortunately, Pfizer has also stepped up, and they said that they would donate or make available another 1 billion doses in the first half of 2022. So right now, I think we are in a much better position. However, it did take a lot of effort. Dr. Tedros had to plead, really. He wrote that op-ed in the New York Times, really criticizing nations for what was happening and raising the alarm signals, because as you said, if we do not have equitable distribution, it will just prolong the pandemic, it will cause unnecessarily more deaths,
Yes.
and also it will cost the world much more money in the long run.
I'm a
And
journalist,
so I do think we
Dr.
are in a
Tan.
better position now.
I'm a journalist. I want to be optimistic, but I cannot be optimistic. That's the nature of my job, right? I need to be critical because I want to ask one critical thing you just said. If it is being implemented, if the promises are being carried out. We saw COVAX earlier running into huge crisis because of some of the manufacturings of vaccines were not possible due to the latest sad situation in India. So how can we make sure all of these pledges will be in place? And by the way, even COVAX is working 100% as it promised. Only 30% of the world population by the end of this year will be able to have access to vaccine. That is, according to the current knowledge, it is still much lower than the kinds of protection we need for our global population. And the most vulnerable countries are showing their most vulnerable points. India is one of those examples. And something going on there, we're going to spread to the rest of the world. This is just the nature of the pandemic. So Dr. Tan, I can't be optimistic, even though I want to sing ode to all the pledges, but it's not possible, Dr. Tan.
Well, certainly, when a country implements an export ban, I think that is another example of vaccine nationalism that is really working against the global goal and effort. However, if we look at what has been delivered so far, what the vaccine companies have been able to do, and also we talked about before the importance, in my opinion, of contract manufacturing of vaccines. Just 2 days ago, Moderna signed an MOU with South Korea and Samsung Biologics to contract manufacture the mRNA vaccine in South Korea. So companies are making efforts to scale up production. The EU, they pledged $1.2 billion to help with vaccine manufacturing in Africa. Countries, I think, are realizing that we really are in one boat, and it's either we all sink or we all survive.
Yeah.
And so I don't share your complete pessimism. I understand the concern, however.
Dr. Ding, earlier the other two guests have already talked about where, how much commitment the countries that they are in are committing to this. I guess in China's case, it's not short of actions either, and probably even more. Tell us more about what China has been doing, and should we be optimistic about China's role in the future in terms of making sure that there's not going to be as much vaccine nationalism as it used to be, we have seen over the past year in the world?
Yeah, that's really an excellent question. Certainly, early on, China joined COVAX to really pledge a commitment to really supply, especially developing country, China's vaccine. And then certainly more recently, the inactivated vaccine by Sinopharma actually was approved by WHO. Certainly, this would meet the COVAX commitment requirement. So over the last year, by our central government as well as by actually the manufacturers, making that commitment actually it's being delivered. And again, China being one of the leading countries in terms of fighting COVID-19 in the front of vaccine development, antiviral, for example, antibody development. A lot of those efforts actually are really towards actually certainly China self as well as actually rest of the world.
I understand over the past 7 days, that's the latest number I got here, from 400 million to 500 million. Just 100 million doses, jabs of vaccines have been inoculated in China over the past 7 days. So of course that's a China speed in a way, but whether the population here in China are fully aware that the role they play, the responsibilities they have in having the vaccines, so that it will make sure this huge part of the population will be safe for the rest of the world to fight against the pandemic. Dr. Ding, I think that's a very urgent question for China to answer.
Certainly, again, China in the past year has been very active in terms of developing the vaccine. Again, two of those type actually were already approved and also already being deployed. And actually a few more is being sort of a trial in the late stage, phase 3 trial, I think will be available in the coming months. Again, in the early days, rolling out the vaccination program had been slow, but in the recent few months, actually, it's really, the speed has been picking up. Certainly, vaccinating, the largest population in the world in China actually is really important, as actually the whole world is really opening up the traveling, economies.
Right, to a certain extent.
So again, focusing on China is actually really important.
Okay. We also see other issues related to the World Health Assembly, such as the independence, the transparency, and the funding issue of WHO, and what will WHO be able to play a role in investigating about the global pandemic, and to what extent can they play that role? How will member countries contribute to that process, and how will that related to the overall UN reform, the overall geopolitics? Well, and the list of questions goes on and on. Even though it's only a meeting of about 7 to 10 days, we're going to see a lot of heated debate over there. And I'm sure we're going to pick up some of those debates later in our program as well. For now, I want to thank the three of you contributing to our conversation. Kate Tulenko and Dr. King Kyung Tan and Dr. We also have from China, Dr. Ding Sheng. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. And you're watching World Insight. Still to come, we hear from the Uruguay president on the nation's place in the global trading system and how his nation is using vaccines to contain the pandemic. Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. We turn to Uruguay, where the country sees a sharp rise in confirmed COVID-19 cases since March this year. According to the WHO, from January 2020 until recent months, there are more than 260,000 confirmed cases in Uruguay. The situation calls for urgent vaccine shipments and distribution. China is the very first country to ship vaccines to Uruguay, and Uruguayan president himself has completed his doses from China's Sinovac vaccine some time ago. Earlier, I spoke to the president, and he told me about how well the country is doing so far and what his expectations are. Let's listen in. How are you feeling personally? I know you waited until your turn to have the vaccine. You didn't jump to the line, but rather waited for your turn. And you said it's important. Tell me more about how you personally feel about the vaccine. Is it everything okay?
Yes, you know that Uruguay processes are high developed in Republican tradition. So when I decided to wait for the vaccine, I was just respecting this rich legacy of our ancestors. My age is from 18 to 55. I am 47 just now. So my turn got in fourth or fifth group. And bueno, the people in the health system are very kind, are very professional, are doing a great job. The people willing to get the vaccines the percentage is growing very fast.
That's great.
People are getting trust in these vaccines. And we started over 30% of people willing to get the vaccination. And now we are far from 70, 80% people that will go to get the vaccine.
Congratulations, Mr. President. You and your colleagues' work finally bear fruit that people are more aware of the importance of vaccines now. And what is the content of cooperation between your country and China in terms of vaccines?
You know that last September, I was sitting just here and I made a phone call to Xi Jinping, President Xi Jinping, and he promised to distribute Chinese vaccines as a global public good. That was a very nice surprise. And he told us it will be available to people in every country besides China. So that was a very good message, straightforward, given by President Xi Jinping. Then we are very confident that China will supply more vaccines to Uruguay and other Latin American countries. They've already done it in a good quantity, in a very good time. So these bilateral and multilateral mechanisms are working with China, and we are very grateful. We are very grateful for that, and we are ready to upgrade our bilateral cooperation in the area of health. I would consider it very firmly to a new stage. So this is done in the context of a strategic partnership, which has become increasingly comprehensive for us. We are living in a good time of our relation with China. I can tell you that honestly that we are very grateful once again and happy of this cooperation we are having together.
Another thing about the policy and governance regarding vaccines and regarding global governance. Mr. President, I remember you said, and here I quote, "If one dictates a measure that is not enforced, it's worse than the non-existence of it," end of quote. There's a lot of debate about what to do as a government to proceed with the vaccine process and the prevention and control measures of the pandemic. Mr. President, how do you see this balance?
It's not easy to have a balance, because here we are talking about health, human health. Here we're talking about social life. Here we are talking of people losing their works. So the balance in between those three items, it's not easy. It's not easy. Liberty is our lighthouse. That's what we think about life. Liberty is very important for human beings. So when we are going to take a measure, when we are going to dictate some policy, liberty is always the first thing we analyze. If you have laws that you cannot enforce, if you have laws that people, you won't be able, that people take these laws and the conducts, it's better not to have them. So we are seeing all around countries with quarantine, countries with very strong measures that has brought lots of social troubles, that has brought economic failures. And so, you know, that this balance we are trying to reach in Uruguay, I can tell you it's not easy. Not all of the political system is in our side. We have lots of discussions here going on, but we trust in what we think. And in the meantime, we have people recovering from the virus. We have still a virus in a slow growth, and we are having lots of Uruguayan dying, and that's a very big pity for us. We feel very sorry. We are trying to do a good job based on the liberty of our people.
Once again, our prayers are with you, Mr. President. This is a very crucial moment, I understand. And not to mention, there is also vaccine nationalism that we have seen in different parts of the world. Some countries are hoarding vaccines several times more than their population could ever use, while other countries having difficulties having access to the vaccines. I want to congratulate you for your vision for getting vaccines for all your population, but there are still many countries that do not even have one jab of vaccines in the world. Mr. President, how do you see this global governance issue about the vaccines and vaccine nationalism?
I have to tell you that here there is a big failure of the international bureaucracy in health, what is related to health. Big countries, powerful countries, got from the laboratories a huge amount of vaccines. And more poorer countries and smaller countries weren't able to enter in that bargain, let's say. And we have to learn from this pandemic. We have to learn. We have to learn to be aware of other countries, our people. We live in the same world. Pandemics go through borders of the countries, and we have to be prepared. We have to be prepared, be much more generous, think in others, and we cannot be once again in this competition where the strongest can win in the road of getting these vaccines.
That's the Uruguay president. While Uruguay is doing as much as it can to control the pandemic, it is also trying to get the country's economy back on track. Uruguay is highly reliant on the meat export industry, where global cold chain transport is the key. So how good are the quality control measures for this country's frozen meat? Will Uruguayan meat retain its reputation for quality that is held before the pandemic? The president from that country has his answers. There are a lot of issues you have to consider as the president of your country. One of it is economic recovery and the economic stability. So what does that mean when you have a big battle against the pandemic being fighting within the country?
Yeah, and you know that we here in Uruguay have 4 cows and 2 sheep per person. So Uruguay's meat production is paramount to our economic well-being and even to our national identity. We are one of the countries in which meat accounts for a larger share of the total goods exports. Beef represents the largest share, but we are also an important supplier of lamb. And in addition of that, we have the right natural and institutional conditions to develop also our poultry and our pork industries. Last year, our meat exports were affected by the lower demand that followed from the COVID-19 pandemic. However, in the first month of this year, 2021, our sales have shown resilience, a tremendous resilience, has begun to recover. Uruguay has strengthened its role as one of China's main beef and lamb suppliers.
Yes.
Actually, in the first 2 months of this year, our frozen beef and mutton export to China increased 34 and 36% compared to 2020. So we are confident to have this upgrade, and trend will continue all this year. I'm convinced that we have to work harder so we can ensure that the very healthy products of our country, of Uruguay, arrive to Chinese customers in the best possible way. We have to follow all the requirements agreed in our very ambitious and modern protocols. We have to do a lot of effort there.
In the world, there's a lot of debate about how the global trade system is likely to be reformed, and what does it mean to have equal shares coming from developing countries, emerging countries in the decision-making process when it comes to new rules. Mr. President, you want to shed some light for us as well?
I can tell you that to have equal shares, it's more a dream to pursue than other thing. But my country relies on our people, on our products, on our technology, our investigation. So we are prepared to go all over the world to do business. What we need is countries to open their borders, open the frontiers, to be aware that we have complementary economies worldwide. And I know that lots of countries tend to protect the productions. I understand. But our production is not large, but it's highly qualified. It's of a great quality. So the share in the markets for smaller countries should be one of the issues that big countries have on the top of their desk for having more freedom. To trade for us is freedom. To trade for us is to grow not only economically, but socially. So we need it, and that we will knock all the doors worldwide and all the organisms to try and open borders, open frontiers. And once again, we should know that we live in one world, and this pandemic, if leaves us something positive, is that we are in one world.
Mr. President, my last question for you. You touched on earlier already about your global views. As you know, sir, we are facing a combination of interesting things, or shall I say, a combination of challenges, both the pandemic, unprecedented geopolitics for decades, and also the real innovation taking place in technological and science side. But there is an unprecedented lack of cooperation, as we have seen over the past few decades in the international community. Mr. President, what do you see as the way forward? Meanwhile, how do you, as the head of state of your country, be able to, at this point, figure out amid all the unpredictabilities, the way forward and the right positioning of your country strategically?
Countries like Uruguay have a need greater than ever for a strong multilateral system in which international law prevails. That for us is a main issue. In times like this, we are most mindful of the relevance of these principles, which are the core of our foreign policy tradition. Uruguay will also pursue greater openness, not only to trade and investment, but also, and you in your question, you mentioned it, to flows of people and ideas. We have to widen our minds. This is an area in which my government is doing some of the greatest efforts. We are committed to a vision in which Uruguay can can become a magnet for people from all the world around, not only to spend their holidays, but also invest and live in our country. We have adopted several measures to facilitate such relocation processes. Obviously, the pandemic stopped a little bit that process, but we believe this is essential to our future and to develop as a nation. Our Chinese friends are also very welcome to explore opportunities of setting in Uruguay. It's a country, our country welcomes foreigners with open arms. That's part of our history. We also want to make our rivers and our ports and free zones and airports to be most efficient. That's a gateway in South America for Chinese, American, and European countries. We are ready to work with the Chinese government. We are ready to work and respecting differences, of course, but embracing, understanding, and cooperating.
Mr. President, what a pleasure talking to you and get to know the vision of your country and also the hard work you and your team has been putting into fighting the crisis. Thank you so much, Mr. President. All the best to you and your country.
Tian, the pleasure is mine. Have a very nice day.
You're a great president talking to us earlier. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching.